Okay, welcome everyone. Hi everyone. Today we are doing an episode of Ask the Experts. This is where we get our experts on and they tell us, they answer all our questions. This is a free form, just people a question and ask, which I think is always fun because formal conversations are always good, but I know we're always having those burning questions. And so having the experts on to just help us clarify and understand is always great. So this month's topic is just anything related to tenant questions that you have. Landlord is having tenant questions. And our guests today are Tamir and Ian. Thank you guys for coming on.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Awesome. So would you guys, let's start with just if you can do a little intro, tell the audience a little bit about yourselves.
Ian, I'm going to give you the respect. You can go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. So I've been practicing landlord tenant law since 2011, primarily practice on the landlord tenant side. I have a background in franchising and understanding contracts, but my expertise somewhat lies at the LTB, and my focus is in that area.
Awesome, thank you.
And I've been practicing for 8 years now, and my main area of expertise is traffic tickets, highway traffic act, provincial offenses, and Ian's taken me under his wing. He's been mentoring me for the last year, so I've been taking on small claims cases and landlord tenant board, which has been very booming since the pandemic.
Yeah, I can imagine. Thank you guys for coming on, and I guess we'll start with that. Let's just start with the first question of, with COVID and all the changes we've seen, what have you guys been seeing on your side with with the landlord tenant board, and just what kind of actions you've seen taken forward?
So we've seen, in my practice, I've seen a great deal of N4s and subsequently L1s being filed. And for those who are not aware of it, it's primarily focused on rental arrears. And if you recall, at the inception of COVID, our premier made an announcement. It kind of went along the lines of, if you can't afford food, then somewhat hold back on the rent. And a lot of tenants took that to heart and subscribed to that policy. And what's happening now is that's starting to filter through the system. COVID kind of put the brakes on the LTB, and prior to COVID, the LTB was already experiencing a level of difficulty with respect to timelines and getting hearing dates. And as a result, there's such a huge backlog. So what we're seeing right now is from starting off with providing the notices to the day that you get a hearing, you're talking about 11 or 12 months have lapsed. And if the average rent around $2,500 to $3,000, that math quickly adds up, and landlords are facing exponentially arrears that are somewhat I've never seen before. So that's a big problem now. There's also a problem and a level of problem with landlords who are experiencing this level of pain when it comes to getting rents, that they have now taken the position of not wanting to be landlords anymore. And of course, that trickles down to housing shortages, inventory problems, and the list goes on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree. It is really tough to deal with when tenants aren't paying, especially when I feel like you're getting hit from both sides as a landlord, right? It's like you may have also lost your job, so money's a little tight, and then you're also not getting at least a little bit of, the tenants also paying. So then it's just like a juggling act, and it's definitely hard times for a lot of people.
And just to add to what Ian was saying, since I've come on board with him, we've been going after a lot of tenants, and I say that in the nicest legal way possible, but tenants just disappearing, not paying rent for over a year, then just, leaving the keys on the counter, just taking off. Then we have to go find them and try to enforce, court orders and collect rent arrears. So that's been difficult, and it's really difficult on the landlords to maintain their, I guess, if they have mortgages in their properties and find new tenants and vetting tenants for, you know,
Mm-hmm.
to be professional and pay, and that's the most difficult part. And since the pandemic, especially backing up the courts and the landlord tenant board, and then going to small claims court to enforce the money. So it's been crazy for the last 2 years.
Yeah, I can imagine. So let's start with a simple question of just the right process, because I also notice as landlords, a lot of people may not take the right steps. And then if you don't, file that N4 properly, for example, and then the L1, I believe, then, it starts creating problems with the court. So let's start with just the basis of to make sure that people are submitting it right, or what problems even can happen if they aren't submitting it correctly, just so that, we're hoping that everyone can, at least the landlords are submitting it right the first time and not making more problems for themselves.
So the forms or the notices that you're talking about, Diana, are notices that can have no defects. And for those who are untrained, and when you prepare these notices, the expectation is that you do them properly. Some of the pitfalls on the notices are incorrectly identifying the rental unit address, and some of the mathematics in terms of correlating how much is outstanding, and making sure that that's on the ledger and that second page of the N4 is correct. A lot of people who take the position suggesting that they can do it on their own rely on that perfect notice that they had sent into the board. They wait 5 or 6 months or 7 months for a hearing, only to find out they missed one of the tenants' names. And right then and there, it becomes a defective notice, and it's a restart process. And you've just lost 6 or 7 months. The costs add up. Tenants are paying for that period of time. So these notices can have no defects. A simple miss of the date, for instance, on your termination date on page 1 of the N4, if you incorrectly put that number or date down, it renders it void. So it's those small little mistakes that can cost you an insurmountable amount of money.
And if I'm not wrong, Ian, you can correct me. If the rent is paid on a monthly basis, you have 14 days waiting period to file the L1 after you serve the N4 notice. Is that correct?
Well, with the guides policy and their guideline, it has to be remedied within 14 days. Otherwise, you can serve the L1 in accordance. That's the only notice actually or application that you can serve after the 30-day deadline. But again, it's very technical, and with notices like that and rent and the cost of rent today, a mistake can be very costly.
And we've seen landlords either come self-represented or hire people such as ourselves after 5-6 months for their first hearing, thinking they're going to get what's due to them. And a small little defect on these applications can send them back down another 5-6 months, and the tenants can just stay there and continue to do what they're doing.
100%, yeah. And just to let everyone know, you guys, anyone in the audience, you guys can put up your hands or put a message in the comments if you have any questions or any specific scenarios or questions that you'd like to ask. So feel free, same thing in our Facebook group. You guys also have the ability to ask questions. I am monitoring the comments. So I just wanted to put it out there just so that everyone knows. So again, give you guys the opportunity. If anyone in the audience has a question, feel free to ask. And so getting on to the next question, if no one has any questions, I'll give you guys 2 seconds, not even 3. No, I'm joking. Okay, so we'll get on to the next question. So so there's actually someone actually asked on the Facebook group was if there is this is not actually related to the N4, but this is more related to when you pay last month's rent. One of the tenants was asking for to be able to use that for the next month, and because I guess they're struggling to make their payments. What would you say to some kind of scenario? Like, what are the, I feel like there's cons involved in that if you decided to say yes, or, what would you advise in that kind of situation?
Well, from the landlord's perspective, if they're going to utilize the LMR or the last month's rent in lieu of the last month's rent, that needs to have consent between both parties, landlord and tenant. The prejudice lies to the landlord because in the event the tenant leaves or does the midnight run after the 28th day, then you've literally already used that LMR for the previous month and you're out of luck. So there's some sort of a safety valve in it for the landlord. And of course, the tenant who's in the precarious position right now of trying to pay rent and can't make ends meet, of course, he's delighted because he's able to use what he had already paid to the landlord and take advantage of it at the period he wants. So the prejudice lies against the landlord, and it's very beneficial to the tenant. As best practices, it's important for the landlord to preserve their rights and to ensure that an LMR remains intact for those specific scenarios.
Yeah, 100% agree. And so really there's nothing, I guess, there's no pros for doing that, right? It's better to just let it run its course and only use it for last month's rent, right?
Correct.
Because what happens is if the tenant cannot pay rent, for example, for one upcoming month, then the landlord and tenant can have a conversation. The landlord may not just jump into serving an N4. Give them a chance to rectify the situation, because if you do serve an N4 and the rent is rectified, then the N4 becomes void. Am I right with that, Ian?
That's correct.
So it's not something common that we deal with the using of the LMR to pay an upcoming month or a month that's in arrears.
Yeah, and I think that's what COVID is doing, right? It's making people kind of like think of unique ways of getting around things just because everyone's struggling.
Yeah,
It's true, Diana. They really are. There are people who are going into fixed term tenancies for 12 months with the expectation that they're going to pay the 12 months, only to realize after month 3 that they can't. So they rely on the landlord to provide a notice, an N4, to basically terminate their fixed term tenancy to try to get out of it. So there's a lot of wiggle room there.
Yeah, 100%. And so, because you also spoke, I believe, the N4, and you said the N6 and the N12 were ones that you were seeing a lot. Was it those ones, or the N11? Sorry, which
so
one?
The N12s have 2 portions to it. So they've got a personal use, and then they've got that same notice used for purchase and sale. I've seen a lot of purchase and sales going on right now with the utilization of the N12, only because landlords are fed up. They're like, this is a business for me, and I'm not making any money, and I can sit home and lose money. Why do I need to have somebody sit in my rental unit and not pay for it? So the N12 is absolutely on the rise. I've experienced probably about a 60% growth just in that notice and subsequent application alone in my business.
Yeah, or even just, I think the prices being so high also incentivize landlords, like, just cash in early and like, let's have this nice, lump sum of money come in, because it's just been all so nuts. Because even like that, I get tenants coming in where a majority are there, or I even get asked, actually, not only they ask me, are you going to sell soon? Because people are having to leave because their current landlord is selling. And so even I get questions like, are you planning to keep your place for long, or is it, because it's just like, why come in and then have to get kicked out within maybe a few months or a year, who knows? Like, the long-term tenants like to stay long-term.
that speaks volumes to what the industry is experiencing right now, and that's the level of shortness in terms of inventory out there. And you've hit the nail right on the head, and that's a big thing that's going to happen now. Where are all these people going to go?
Exactly. It is getting tough on all sides. Everyone, I think on all sides, we're all struggling. It's like either the landlords or the tenants is just hitting everyone on both sides.
Some of the tenants are quickly recognizing that and taking a bit of advantage of it. I don't know if you're aware of it, but when COVID hit, and landlords were desperate to sell their properties, they quickly recognized they weren't getting hearing dates. And as a result, the ball kind of fell into the tenants' court. And tenants are smart and they're savvy and they're educated, and they go online and they quickly realize that they could turn this around. And there's this new feature that has come out. It's called cash for keys. What happens is the tenant recognizes the property is being sold and prevents the sale of it, or makes it difficult for the sale, prevents showings. And as a result, the landlord starts to get fed up and basically puts their hands up in the air and says, all right, what's it going to take for you to go? And of course, everybody's aware. It's just a number. How much is it? And since COVID, this is brand new. Some tenants are walking away with windfalls, $20,000, $30,000, $45,000, just so that landlords can provide vacant possession or provide the opportunity to sell the home. So
Yeah.
that's a new experience that's come out of COVID.
And actually, now that you're talking about that, are there any implications to the landlord or the tenant, or actually not even that, like the process? Because I understand making sure you do it in the right way is very important too, when you're providing that money. And I think having them I haven't had to do it, but I know that people are saying that you have to like make sure you do it the right way, or else you could kind of, even as a landlord, lose the money. What is the right way to do to make sure you do the cash for keys and they actually leave?
So just so that you're aware, no two people can contract outside the act. That's one of the premises, and that's paramount in the act. This is a side deal that you're having with the tenant. So the reality is, in order for it to be enforceable, you need a couple of things. One, a mutual release between the parties, agreeing that I'm going to give you this in exchange for something else. And then you need to take it a step further, Diana, and that would be engaging in something called an N11, Norman 11. Okay. And the N11 basically states this is a mutual termination of the tenancy, and as such, we agree both parties to mutually terminate the tenancy. This allows the landlord to take that notice and file it with the board to get an order. And once the order is achieved, then that order can be taken to the sheriff in the event, or the highly likely event, that the tenant doesn't leave. Because most tenants want money in exchange for a broom swept rental place. And I have seen very few where the tenant has exchanged money and didn't leave. Very, very few. But as an audit precaution, it would be advisable for anybody who's entering into that sort of arrangement that they engage in an N11.
Okay. And so there's no contract or anything. I think it's just, you just have to make sure you don't, like, they're fully out of the house, I think, before you give them the money, right? Is I guess the most important part. So besides the N11, there's no actual other, like you said, like side contract that you have to write or anything for it?
No, so my office and Tamir's offices normally prepare the mutual release that lay out the condition in order to receive the money and what the expectation is when you leave. And that's pretty much, it's kind of out of the scope of the LTB, because like I had earlier mentioned, this is kind of revolutionized since COVID. And it's only because of COVID that this has happened. So it's not written in any stone. So paralegals have kind of adjusted and made adjustments to facilitate that type of agreement. And like I said, Tamir's and ours is pretty standard, and very rarely have I seen a tenant not wanting money in exchange for leaving.
Yeah, this is true.
But coming from our world, you know that everything we do, we have it in writing, regardless of email, text message, a written document. You know that we always have our bases covered.
100%. And again, just putting it out there for anyone, if you guys have any questions, feel free to put up your hand or unmute yourself. You can always interrupt us, no issues, or any comments. Same thing on the Facebook group. Just want to reiterate that again. So the next question is, what exactly then is the difference between the N11 and the N12? Because they both seem like you can use them to terminate, but what makes, like you're saying, for that specific scenario, you said it was better to use the N11 than the N12.
So the N12 is a notice that basically makes the tenant aware of two potential situations, either a purchase and sale or somebody who's the landlord or a spouse or a child is looking to use the rental unit. The N12 requires a few steps in order for the N12 to be actually valid. The first step is to issue the notice. The second step is to allow the tenant 60 days on that notice. And the third step is to pay the compensation. What compensation is it's equivalent to 1 month's worth of rent to the tenant prior to the termination date. So for instance, Diana, let's assume that we have a scenario where your child wants to take over the rental unit. So you would provide a 60-day notice identifying that your child is looking to take possession of the rental unit. And you would also need to provide the board with a declaration. And it basically says that you're aware that compensation is a requirement, that you're aware that for 1 full year, you cannot re-rent that unit, that you're aware that you're taking this unit on a good faith, which basically means that you have a genuine intention to occupy the rental unit. It doesn't mean that that rental unit, let's assume you have 5 rental units and that's the rental unit you want. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be the best one or the most convenient one. What it means is that you really need to be genuine in saying that you're going to take the unit. So the N11, on the other hand, is just basically where you and the tenant mutually terminate the tenancy with no strings attached. They're not entitled to compensation. There's no declaration. There's no loss of income. Those are the things that you would experience in the event that you use those steps to exercise the N12. So there's a great deal of difference between the two notices and subsequent applications. One can be far more costly than the other. For instance, if you were to serve an N12 notice and you weren't genuine, and after 3 months you decided, I'm not comfortable with this, let's just put it back on Kijiji and we'll re-rent it. You're facing a T5 where the tenant can allege that you weren't honest, that you lied on the declaration, and they would be entitled to the differential in rent from your old unit to the new unit. Example, if on Diana's unit I was paying $2,000 and in the new world I'm paying $3,000, the delta is 1 times 12 is $12,000 plus moving expenses. So this is a costly mistake. And if you're going to use that N12, you need to make sure that that is what you're doing. And you're going to live with it for a year.
And another big one is, we didn't touch on it yet, Dan, is if you are serving an N12 for the purposes of taking over the unit again for a family member yourself, you sell the unit within that year. That could, and you could end up winding up in court paying a lot of money to the landlord tenant board for damages. And there's a fine, I believe, that's calculated for that. And the tenant can essentially counterclaim against you and get damages for the amount of money that they would be entitled to by still living there. So that's one of the main things that the N12 has to be done correctly, whether you want to take possession again for yourself or a family member, or if you're intending on selling the place and not re-renting it in bad faith. So very tricky.
Mhm. So then so actually it even matters in which, so it sounds like it even matters in which one, if you're saying family is living, even in that scenario, you can't sell it, even though it's an N12. You have to make sure that you know what you're doing within that year.
Right.
Correct.
There is some case law that's kind of hit the books now where there'd be a substantial change in your circumstance, but the threshold is so high. You're committed. When you engage in an N12, you need to be of the mindset that you're committed to this for 1 full year.
Mhm.
And my friend mentions it. It's a good faith argument. The application is a no fault application. It's neither the fault of the landlord nor the tenant. But the condition is that you remain committed for 1 full year.
Mhm. Okay, yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that. And actually talking about something that I feel like happens all the time, or not all the time, sorry, recently a lot, again, because of COVID, a lot of people have been renovating their properties and either selling them or just trying to find better tenants, or purchasing them to, renovate them and then find new tenants. But in the case where you have to, if you're going to sell or find, let's say, new tenants, and you want to do those renovations, what forms do they fill and what are those steps like? And what do we need to take into consideration?
So that's a great question, and they actually is starting to come to light, a lot of that. So the form that you'd be utilizing is an N Norman 13, and that form has, that notice has a couple of different features to it. So if you change the footprint of the unit, in other words, let's assume you had a 3-bedroom and you're converting it to a 1-bedroom. So you basically are demolishing and you're creating a new footprint. That provides notice to the tenant, and the tenant on those conditions would not be entitled to the same thing that they would be entitled to if it was just a straight reno. The difference between a reno and a demolition allows the tenant to come back to the unit at the same price and the same conditions once it's fully renovated. For instance, if I do painting and plumbing and HVAC and the room that they were originally in remains the same, there's a return policy where the tenant is obligated to provide information as to where their whereabouts are, and the landlord is expected to make sure that when the renos are completed, that the first offer or first opportunity or first right of refusal goes to the tenant. If it doesn't, the landlord is obligated to pay damages. Scenario number 2 is the demo, and in that case, there is no first right of refusal. The landlord can take steps to charge whatever they want in the new world, and so be it. So those are the two differences.
Okay, very interesting. And I believe it's also you have to have them sign it 90 days, I believe it is, before the
120
renovation.
days.
120 days before the renovations can start.
Correct. And again, my
sorry.
apologies. And again, they would be entitled to a form of compensation.
Mhm. And that would be, and so actually that was going to lead to my next question, because I know there's some people that, for example, when let's say it was just a renovation and not a demolition, but they do need to leave because the extent of the renovations are enough that they can't stay there. Is that the compensation where you'll have to, for example, pay for a place for them to stay, or is that just some people do that out of their own goodwill? Or is that mandatory that you have to find a place for them to stay while the renovations are going on and then, allow them to go in?
So some of the large landlords have the ability to take a tenant from one location and transpose them into another location. And that's a seamless thing for them. But the mom and pops who are running, one or two units don't have that level of flexibility. So as a gesture of goodwill, it's great. And the act says you can do that. But if the rental unit has just one unit, they would receive a level of compensation equivalent to 1 month. But if there's 4 or more units, then there's a different level of compensation. But it's 120 days notice and a return on the reno, but not a return on the demo.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry, what do you mean by that? A return on the demo?
So the tenant would have the right of first refusal on the renovation.
Oh, yeah.
Otherwise, it becomes the renoviction, and that's the new terminology for being evicted based on an N13 where the landlord was dishonest about the renovation. And they've coined that new term as called renoviction. And it's been hitting the newspaper quite recently. It's touched on.
Oh, okay. And also, if a tenant comes, or if you go to the tenant and you say you want, let's go with the renovation one, or I don't know, actually, maybe I'm assuming they're different, but maybe they're not. And they decide like, no, I don't want to move, and I don't want these renovations to be done. Is there anything you can do about that, or do the tenants have the saying you just have to wait it out?
So the tenants have something called security of tenure, which basically means that I can remain here in this rental unit, despite you giving me notices, until I have a hearing. And it's at the hearing where a board member will determine who's right, who's wrong. So the reality is, yes, you can be served with a notice. And yes, that notice says that you need to move out in 120 days, but you don't need to. You have the security of tenure to fall back on in the Residential Tenancies Act.
And that's something a lot of tenants don't know that they have. They get served a notice and they start panicking and they start worrying that they have to find a new place to live on the termination date that's on the notices, and they start freaking out. And the phones start ringing here. So.
And I guess that's the same situation for demolition. They can also say they don't want it to be changed, right? So they have to be willing to accept leaving to get the rent. And I believe that's also the same, even for example, if you decide if they decide, for example, yes, I want the renovations done. And this one I know for sure is just related to the renovations, but yes, you can get the renovations done, and they have the right of first refusal, but they don't have to agree to the rents increasing. So that also gives is that right? Because that also gives the landlord the like, you have to think about if it's worth it for you to renovate it as a landlord if the tenant doesn't accept the increase in the unit.
So just for clarity, Diana, on a renovation, if your rent today is 1,000 and I renovate, I paint, put new toilets, new HVAC and AC, I cannot raise the rent unless I go into something called an AGGI, which stands for an above guideline increase. You cannot unilaterally raise rent after a reno. Tenants have the security that after the renovations, not the demolition, after the renovations, they go back to where they were pre-renovations. There is no rent increase. So when a landlord needs to consider that, they need to consider whether or not they're going to change the footprint. Because it's only when you change the footprint, that's when you trigger the possibility of raising rent to anybody you want. Because there is no right of first refusal after I change the footprint. It's a demo. It no longer existed in the old world. It's existed in the new world. Therefore, new people, new rent.
Oh, okay. But isn't there's a form that we can have the tenant sign to increase the rent more than the yearly inflation, isn't there? Like whatever it is for the year, the 1 point whatever. Isn't there a form for that?
No. So here's a common misconception. Some people believe that if you tell the tenant, I'm going to raise above the guide, in other words, for this year it was 1.2, and you decide to raise it 5%. And for 11 months, the tenant pays that increase of 5%. 11 months. But on the 11th month, the tenant decides, you've illegally collected rent above the guide. And because I've paid for 11 months, doesn't trigger that to become the lawful rent. The lawful rent is triggered after 12 months of paying it. So what could happen is the tenant could live there 11 months, pay the increase, and then recoup it back on an illegal collection of rent, even though you had an agreement, because you cannot contract outside the act. Only 2 notices can be served for rental increase: the standard N1 and the N2. Those are the only 2. And engaging in conversations where you believe as a landlord you have a deal in principle and they're paying for 11 months doesn't negate the fact that it's on the 12th month that it becomes the lawful rent. And those are the changes that just took place in September of 2021.
Oh, that took change, because I heard that actually there was a person, and I think but maybe I don't know. Was it before that if you increased it unlawfully and it didn't matter how many years, that they could retroact all that pay again?
Correct.
Oh, so that's what it was before.
That's
so
exactly
now
right.
It's just 11 months.
Right. So after 11, on the 12th month, it becomes the lawful rent. Even though I may have increased it, you've agreed to it after 12 months, that's the lawful rent.
And so was there ever a form that you could sign to increase the rents?
No, N1, N2.
Oh, I don't know what I was thinking of then. Oh, so, but N1 is
notice to increase rent, and the N2 is for any properties that were built after November the 15th, 2018, because they don't fall under rent control. Let me give you a scenario for that one, because it is quite interesting. Let's assume you have a home that was built in 1974. Right? And here we are in year 2022, and you decide to build an addition on that home. New room, new bathroom, new everything. That new addition doesn't fall under rent control. In other words, every year I can raise the rent to the clear blue sky. But the other half of the house, believe it or not, falls under rent control.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And that started when?
No, it's always been, it's becoming, now people are starting to renovate homes and adding features. It's becoming more prevalent now.
We're finding a lot of that with condos that were built after the date that Ian just proposed. Landlords are increasing their rent by like 20-30% a year. And there's nothing tenants can do about it. Pay it or leave. It's unfortunate. It's interesting what's going on, especially with our market these days.
Yeah, but isn't that you're talking, but that happened recently. That was it's not just in Toronto. Is this all in Ontario?
Here, Toronto, Ontario.
Oh, it's in Toronto. Okay. Yeah.
Ontario.
Yeah.
So it's the RTA is for us, so Ontario. So it's anything that is built after November the 15th, 2018 will not fall under the same umbrella as rent control. Anything. It was an incentive for builders to start building. And now, as you can see, there are plenty of cranes in the sky. Those new builds are all, so you can just imagine.
Yeah, I didn't realize that was I thought that was just Toronto. I didn't realize that all of Ontario. Oh wow, that's really gonna change things. And like some people who don't care to have their tenants in there, I guess will just hike it up to kind of get rid of them.
Right.
If their current tenants don't rent, somebody else will. Given the housing market today, it's almost as expensive to rent a condo as it is a house.
Mhm.
So
It's crazy. And so you're talking about the N1 and where you can increase the rent, and maybe it's because I don't know the process, because you're saying so you have to have with the N1, you have to have a reason for increasing the rents, don't you?
So once a year, I typically do it as best practice on the anniversary date of the lease. Set it up that way. But once a year, you look to the government for the guideline, and they are published. And that's what you would need to provide the tenant with that notice. It's on the Landlord and Tenant Board website. It's very user-friendly. It describes your current rent, what the increase is, and the new world rent. Anything over and above that would require you to provide notices for an above guideline increase, and that in itself is a whole different can of worms, where you have to take capital expenditures year over year. So if a landlord experiences a capital expenditure that's markedly different from past years, they can petition the board to go over and above the guide in addition to what the guidelines. So normally what you're seeing is 2.5% up to 3% plus the 1.2%. So you're talking about 4.2%.
Okay. Oh, so the N1 you're talking about, that's if you decide to increase every year, that's the form, which is actually, I think that's also a good topic to talk about, because I know that a lot of people will reuse the lease instead of the N1 to increase. And I've heard people get themselves into trouble because of that. Can you speak a little bit more of that? Because I don't know, but I do know that if people don't do the rent increase properly, that also gives issues.
Yeah, so the tenant is not obligated to pay a rental increase unless he's been provided with proper notice. And that notice is on the LTB's website. And I have seen errors on those notices that cause the landlord to restart again. So even though you may have a commitment from the tenant that this new world is the new rent, it's only recognized by the LT Landlord Tenant Board through its appropriate notices. And the N1 is the appropriate notice for that particular scenario. It's very user friendly, Diana. It's a 2-page notice that needs to be provided to the tenant.
Yeah, and you don't have to fill out that 13-page one again, because I know a lot of people do that actually. They think that you just re-sign that 13-page tenant agreement, and that actually nullifies it, right? As you're saying, it's now that rent increase isn't actually a valid one as of after the 11 days now, or 11 months.
11 months, right? So that actually brings me to an important topic, actually, and leases and structure of leases. You see, when you've engaged in a lease or you restart a new lease, there's a lot of notices that you cannot no longer give. Because when you've created what you call a fixed tenancy by signing a new lease, you can't issue N12 notices. You can't issue N8 for persistent late payment. So when you go into a new lease in year 2, it's very prejudicial to the landlord. It's great for the tenant because he's got security of tenure, of which he would have already had he not signed the new lease. Because like I had said earlier, tenants have security of tenure. And after lease 1 is finished, it traverses to an evergreen, which basically month to month to month to month, with the same rules and the same everything. So at the end of the day, when you do kind of that scenario, the landlord is actually prejudiced by it. That's why it's important to look for proper representation. Even if it's a quick call, it can save you a ton of money, a ton of aggravation. And you've got to stick to the notices. Despite you may willing to negotiate with the tenant, it doesn't supersede the notices. And that's the most important thing.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Yeah. So what would the proper process be then if you're, oh no, you're sorry, you would still use the N1 to increase the rent, but you're just saying there's other N forms that you cannot use because of the lease agreement.
Right, because what you're saying is, well, some landlords take the position of, well, instead of utilizing the N1, which is the proper form, I'll just give them a new lease for another year. And right, so you're adhering to the guideline, but you're basically tying your own hands from exercising your steps to take other notices. And some of them are the N12. In other words, if you're in a fixed term, I can't issue an N12 for personal use because you're guaranteed 12 months. Or if you're habitually late with rent is due on the 1st, and every month I pay on the 15th, that's persistently late. And I can't use an N8 for that note because you've engaged in a fixed term.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, now I'm understanding this a little bit better, what you're saying. So, but then that also applies in your, so using that tenant agreement, let's say in the second year, actually there is no problem with doing it. For some reason I thought there was. It's just you're putting yourself in a situation that's actually worse for you as a landlord, and you want to go to that month to month by use the N1 is better.
Well, yeah, to increase rent in lieu of your scenario would be the proper approach to the situation. It allows the benefits to the landlord and it still preserves the rights to the tenant. But if you go into scenario 2, you're prejudicing the landlord while still preserving the rights of the tenant. It's biased in my opinion.
Oh, interesting. So if you use the lease agreement, then even in your first year, so now you are capped to that 12 months. If you happen to decide something happens, you need to sell, you can't actually sell, or you could.
Sell.
I mean, but you can't use
sell.
that, and you can't use that N12 form.
No, you can't use the N8 for persistent late payment for the fixed term, and you can't use the N12 for personal use.
Oh, for
your son, your daughter, family member. No, it's a fixed term.
Oh.
And even if you want to sell it, you need to sell it with a tenant. You can't guarantee vacant possession because you're in a fixed term. Highly prejudicial.
And you definitely can't raise the rent in the first year. You have to wait 1 year, and then you got to give them 90-day heads up that you're going to be increasing the rent. So essentially it's 15 months before you can get that above guideline increase.
So last question. I'm gonna actually, before I ask, I'm so surprised. Everyone's so quiet. Usually with these kind of like the landlord and tenant questions, I usually have people very actively asking lots of questions. So I'm surprised. But again, just giving you guys the last chance. I'm gonna ask one more question, unless you guys have it. Same thing to Facebook. You guys can put up your hand because there's one last question. So I'll give you guys 1 second, 2 seconds. Come on, guys. Or else I'm going to ask my question, although I kind of forgot it now. What's my question? I'll give you guys a second while I remember my question.
I feel like Ian's answered a lot of unanswered questions, unasked questions.
Yeah, that was, oh, now I forgot my question. What was my question going to be? Oh, I forgot. But the information that you guys provided was amazing. I didn't know a lot of that because I've never had to go, I guess, through all those processes, but it definitely makes me want to, oh, that was my question. Sorry, now I got it. If you don't do a rent increase, and you've signed your lease agreement and you pass the 12 months or you're on the anniversary, so it's okay to not sign anything and leave it like that because you're just going to a month to month if everything stays the same, right?
So you could essentially raise the rent. Doesn't have to be on the anniversary date, but it can only be once a year. I choose the anniversary date only just for ease and less confusion. But you as a landlord don't need to take steps to raise the rent. If you're happy with it, it is what it is. I look at landlords as a business, and as a business, there's inflation and there's inflationary costs, and those need to be recouped, and somebody has to pay it. And the ball goes south, and unfortunately, it's the tenant who's going to have to pick up the shortfall.
But even if you do raise the rent, let's be honest, if you look at the chart on the landlord tenant website, it's not a significant amount. It might add up over the years, but it's not something that's detrimental. But I agree with you, and it's a strategic and smart business move. You have to do it, but you don't have to.
Especially with inflation, it's more right now probably than what they allowed to increase. So technically, we're losing even if we're increasing the rent right now. So
Correct.
We should all be raising our rents because I feel it's hitting everyone. It is hitting tenants, yes, but it is hitting the landlords a lot too, because their expenses are just becoming more and more. But what my point was, there's no negative ramifications of not signing anything. If you decide as a landlord, I'm not going to increase the rent after a year, that's the standard process if you're not going to change anything.
If it remains the status quo, then there's nothing that needs to be done and no steps on the landlord's part.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, I learned a lot. And I'm pretty sure everyone else did. That's probably why they're all quiet. Everyone's just like, oh my God, taking notes. What is all this information that we're receiving right now? So before we leave, just for the viewers and for everyone that's watching, would you guys like to give any contact information, any details if anyone wants to reach out for your services or any extra questions they may have for you?
You want to take the lead on that, Tamir?
Our contact information? Sure. I can provide my phone number or email. What do you think is more appropriate, Diana?
Whatever you like to give, or even if you have like a Facebook page, wherever they can reach you, it works.
So yeah, so I have my professional Facebook page. It's Tamir Salomon Legal Services, and it'll be just like this on my screen here. SALOMON. Tamir spelled TAMIR. And for my friend and colleague, it's the same. It's going to be Shemesh Paralegal. His first name you can see on the screen is Ian, IAN. We both have pages. Ian's got a nice website. All our informations are there. We can be contacted anytime. I know Ian and I work way past the 9 to 5 times, so we're always answering our phones and emails. So if anyone has any questions or needs legal representation, we are available.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Tamir and Ian. Great information. It was great to chat and get to know a lot more. I didn't realize how little I knew about this. So thank you so much for sharing, and hopefully in a future day we can have you guys on again for any other questions, and hopefully the audience is a little more chatty because it's a very quiet audience today.
Okay.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me, Diana.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Bye, everyone on Facebook.
Take care.
And we'll see everyone in the next episode. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.